Welcome to this introduction on service design thinking. My name is Damien Nunes, and today I will be dissecting the term service design thinking in various elements. So, the first thing that I would like to address is the term service. What is a service, and why is it actually so important? Next to that, I would like to continue on what service design is. It's a formal design discipline focusing on the development and improvement of services, and also dive into design thinking, which is a mindset, a process, and toolkit for designers and non designers to solve problems. But at first, let's start diving into services. I'm also very interested in what is your perspective on what a service actually is. So, I would like to ask you to take a piece of paper and write down what kind of associations do you have with a service? What kind of features, what kind of characteristics? Or maybe you can write down a small or short definition of what a service is to you. And I think it's very important that we are aware of our own bias and that we're also able to widen our perspective. So please pause the video now for a second, write down your associations and definition, and then we will continue in a second when you are finished. Okay, I hope that you now wrote down your definition or maybe your associations. Please have a close look at that when we are going through this presentation, and maybe you see also that we might be widening your perspective on what a service actually is and why they are important. All right, let's go to the first interpretation of what a service actually could be. While you see it often in the manufacturing industry, that they see services as an activity to increase or maintain the value of a product. So you could think about a warranty, or you could see, for instance, as servicing your car. And while manufacturing see it often as a necessity or something secondary, so it's very product focused, and it's rather now if you look at the economy and the world that we live in right now. But still, you see this perspective quite present, and it's not only manufacturing organizations basically that have that perspective. You also see that in a lot of other sectors, and also sometimes in specific departments that we have this kind of perspective. So it's important to take that into consideration. So where does this product mindset actually come from? Well, for that, we actually need to go back to the origin of that. And we need to go back to the goods dominant logic. And this is back into the 17th century. And it's also described in the book The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And if you look at that time, the colonial era, the trade business played an important role. So if you look at the trade business, it was about acquiring resources, producing the production of value into products, for instance. And so these kind of products had intrinsic value that we could transport and then actually also exchange it for value. So, for instance, for money. And then there was the consumption of value. So, production, transportation, exchange, and then consumption. So there was a strong focus on this transactional relationship, and there was a strong focus on this intrinsic value. And we see that over time that this kind of definition, this kind of perspective has changed. So this is also where we come to the second interpretation of a service, where we see services as a bad or intangible alternative to a product. So we have the so-called IHIP model of 5 I's by Zentmat and Lovelock, and they talk about services are intangible or heterogeneous, inconsistent, inseparable. The customer is always involved. It's perishable. We cannot make an inventory of our services. So there was also quite some critique on services. Yes, there was a clear distinction on what a product is and what is a service. We have defined the characteristics, but there was also quite some critique. So if you look at intangibles, so a product is something you can hold, you can see, but a service is something, yeah, a little bit less easy to grasp. So they said basically, well, because it's so hard to grasp, it's really hard to display or communicate a service. What's the value? What is it that I'm actually selling to you? But also, it's very hard to set the price. If you think about the price of a product, we could say, well, it costs so much to make, and we want to have this percentage basically on top of it as our revenue, for instance. Well, and also if you look at intangibility, you cannot protect your services through patents, which was of course very important if you think about when you were producing something. Well, if you look at inconsistent, you could say every service experience is different. If you go to the barber shop, there's things change, and it can have a big impact also on the standardization and the quality control of services. They saw that as something which is much harder to achieve if you talk about services than it actually is for a product. And then they talked about inseparability and involvement. So the customer is always involved in the production process, right? It's not separable service. And the production and the exchange and consumption of value is often intertwined. So it's really involved with each other. Also, sometimes other consumers play an important role. So they said basically, well, the centralized mass production of service is rather difficult. But this is very much from a product or goods dominant logic. We need to produce something and we deliver it. And this goes, quite in the opposite if you look at service where it's more intertwined. And then we talked about inventory. So services cannot be inventory. We cannot make an inventory of our services where we can do that of a product. So they saw this as something, a negative driver for economic growth. So this was also a point to say, well, we need to invest more in a product economy rather than in a service economy. So from here, we saw a different mindset evolving after that. So this is more the service dominant logic, where service is seen as the fundamental basis of exchange. So customer co-production is something which is something positive here, and I'll elaborate on that in a second. But also goods are only seen as a distribution mechanism for service provision. It's not the goods that are so important, but actually the features of, for instance, the extractions of value that surrounds that when actually using them. And another very radical thing that they mentioned is that all economies are actually service economies. Well, and they also really made a very interesting comparison based on those IHIP model and also the 5 I's to really say, well, some of these things are quite interesting paradoxes because they can also work in your own benefit. So what they basically said, if you look at intangibility, so services are not tangible, they dispelled the myth because they said, well, services often have tangible results. It's not about the service or product being not tangible, but it's about the results that services or products deliver. And services, well, the result is quite tangible, as it can be also with products. But on the other hand, tangible goods are often also purchased for intangible benefits, for social status, for psychological needs, for instance, right? So the reason to say basically it's intangible, it's something negative. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be, and it's also not necessarily correct. And also tangibility can be a limiting factor in distribution. So if you think about if my resources are on the other side of the world, but I have my consumers here, they can actually become something negative or limiting factor for my business. So they said basically the implication was unless tangibility has a marketing advantage, it should be reduced or eliminated if possible. So that's a very bold statement, very radical if you look at what the original view on services were. So if you look at inconsistency and heterogeneity, we say, well, tangible goods are often also heterogeneous. Well, the days of Ford when they had the first Model T Ford are where cars can only be black. If you look at now, cars can be modified. Other products are quite heterogeneous, and also many servers are actually can be standardized. There are a lot of servers where the process is quite standardized. And if things are heterogeneous, well, maybe it's a benefit and maybe it's not something negative. So if you look at the implication that they mention, the normative marketing goal should be customization, personalization. We really should be focused on really identifying the needs of the specific customer and tailor to that instead of just delivering a standardized product. So customization over standardization. So they also looked into inseparability and involvement. So the consumer is always involved in the production of the value. So they said like it's not like you have the production of value within a product, for instance, and the consumption and the exchange, like with those three various phases. No, but it's value is only being delivered, created when there's actually interaction between the product and the consumer, or for instance, the service and the customer. So that's really a different perspective on what value is. Are we talking about intrinsic value within a product, or are we talking about value in use? And value in use, they said, also applies to products. So the normative marketing goal should be to maximize consumer involvement in the value creation. We don't have to. We should not see it separately, but we just see it as a constant dance between the product or the service provider and the actual consumer. And lastly, inventory and perishability. Well, they said basically tangible goods can also perish. So, for instance, fruits can go bad, cars can rust. Also, the value of a car or a house can fluctuate depending on all kinds of economic factors, for instance. So, that doesn't really uphold. And also, many service results in long lasting benefits, right? It's not just this first interaction and that's where the value lies. No, it's something a service can have a longer lasting impact. Value is created at the point of consumption, not in the factory. That's what I mentioned before. And the normative goal of the enterprise should be to reduce inventory and maximize service flows. So if you have a warehouse full of products, it's you have to pay the rent of the warehouse. All these kind of things are extra costs, which increases the price of the product. So you should actually have a highest flow of production or service flow. What they also said is both tangible and intangible capabilities can be inventorized. So if you look at a lot of services are also very digital or can be standardized in a way. You also see that there is a way to provide value when it is actually directly needed. We can store service processes in a way. And inventory represents an additional marketing cost. As I said before, if you have a warehouse, it is an additional cost. So the normative goal of the enterprise should be to reduce the inventory and maximize the service flows. All right. Well, let's look into a gaming industry where you really clearly see this transition. And why do we look at the gaming industry? Because this is really a leading industry, and this might also tell us something for the industry that you are, for instance, working in. So if we look, for instance, at the new console, the new PlayStation 5, they sell a version with a disc, but now they're also really pushing for the digital version. There's no physical games on a disc or on a cartridge. You just download them directly from the internet, from the Sony PlayStation Store. So here you can also see like they are really deliberately making products less tangible. You see that already coming through. Also, for instance, if you look at Google Stadia, so this is a new disruptive platform that they wanted to introduce in the gaming industry, and they basically say, well, in order, it's not that we just put the console at the customer, but that we have all this computing power. We just put it in our own server, so we own basically the computer power, this console, etc. You don't need to own it as a consumer. We maintain it, we upgrade it, etc. And you just have a certain subscription. So what is interesting about that is that you can, because it's connected to the internet, you can play it the same game on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet, on your television, and you get the same quality, the same kind of options and features that you would have normally, but then only on one fixed location. You have instant access because you don't need to download and install the games because it's all there within the cloud. It's like opening up a virtual machine. Online multiplayer, well, you can already connect players directly within the service actually, and there's no need for an expensive gaming rig or console to actually buy. And as servers are being upgraded, also the quality of gaming will also go up with new features and new quality of graphics, for instance. So we see then already that games are becoming intangible, consoles are becoming intangible, virtual consoles, as we talked about. But what is also interesting is that a lot of the games are high quality games are actually becoming free. So no longer is this one moment of interaction, of exchange, where I buy a game or a console and that's it. No, but I just get free access basically to a service. There are various microtransactions for skins, for missions, for other kind of options, but it's also free marketing. If I'm there, I talk with my friends, like this is a really cool game. It's this massive kind of onboarding. It's also of course, a lot of value that a customer might actually provide. And then, of course, you need to think about the user data which is generated. So there's also a lot of marketing purposes. Or, for instance, you can use the data to actually improve the game design, for instance. So everything is becoming more and more intertwined. It's not more that it's just separate production and consumption, but it's really becoming more one experience. And you can really see that within the gaming industry. Also, Minecraft is a good example of I don't need to provide a fixed game, but maybe I just provide an environment, a digital space with digital tools where also gamers themselves can create worlds. They can share these worlds, and by doing so, you um, yeah, the co-production of value is, I think, a very interesting thing that we actually see here. You, as a producer, are not only responsible for that, but your customers or consumers are moving more to a prosumer. They produce and consume at the same time. And you can even, on these kind of platform spaces, invite external parties to add to, in this case, then the Minecraft universe. So to bring this all together, it's really about a different economic mindset. So with the goods dominant logic, it's all about the intrinsic value of a console, a game, etc., those kind of things, and a single financial transaction or various follow-up single financial transactions. That is basically the goods dominant logic traditionally. Well, with the service dominant logic, it's all about value in use. So actually the interaction with the service provider, with the products, it's one big ecosystem basically. And we really need to look at the full customer life cycle. So it's really about maybe a customer comes in freely. There are different kind of interactions there with your actual product or service, maybe with other kind of customers or maybe other kind of stakeholders on the platform, for instance. So it's a much more complex experience with where you can generate and exchange value. So this different kind of mindsets, just to give you an overview, with this more goods dominant logic, the product is central, service is just a subset of it, where we then moved into different kind of, we got products, so we got services, and they were like competing with each other, which ones are better way of economic growth. And now we really see that service dominant logics really maybe putting another perspective on it, saying, well, everything we do is basically service orientated, and products are just a mechanism basically for value exchange. So you could ask yourself the question, is this a product or a service? If it is a self-driving car and you have a subscription, is it still a product? Or if you look at this food box, for instance, is this a product or a service? And what are we actually buying? Is it the content, the fruit, the vegetables, etc.? Or is it more about the experience and the convenience that we are actually buying? Is that the value, for instance? Right? Is that the differentiating factor? And if you look at Netflix, for instance, I think this is a very good example on how digitalization played an important role in how it all disrupted the whole industry there. But also even still the devices that we use every day. Is this a product or a service? Or is it just an interface to a digital world where we have access to all kind of services and interactions? And then still, you might say, um, yeah, a phone can also be this having something tangible is maybe also a status symbol, right? So it can also maybe have intangible value in that way. But you could also argue that there are maybe different ways, other ways basically to express social status by then only actually owning a phone there, for instance, right? So we see that things are actually blurring in the world of products, but also in services. So the impact of digitalization, we move more from tangible dominant to more intangible dominant. So from goods and products to services, and we see that it's exponentially fueled by the digitalization of our society. So technology can gain a lot from service dominant logic. If you talk about value co-production, for instance, on the systems and platforms that we have in place, the value exchange, but also the relationship building. It's very hard if you every time need to reacquire a customer with marketing, for instance, instead of having them in your ecosystem and being able to provide more and different kind of services and products or features within that ecosystem. But what is a challenge, of course, is still to think about how do we monetize value, which you often see that there are a lot of platforms out there. There is a lot of value being created, but customers still have the perspective that we still, um, yeah, they still need to get used to also maybe paying for a car in a subscription rather than having a fixed price, for instance. So we see that on the one hand, organizations need to develop themselves. On the other hand, we also see that with the consumers themselves, a transition is needed. Well, some of you might say I'm already working in the service sector, so goods dominant logic or goods dominant thinking is not actually relevant for me. But well, you could argue like, okay, maybe you're working in educational sector. You could ask yourself, well, what are we actually doing? Are we selling diplomas? And if not, what are we actually doing? What are we actually providing? What kind of value are we providing? And what are customers actually paying for, or students in this case, I mean. And for the financial sector, are we lending money? Are we creating money? Why do we exist? What do we stand for instance? So also your brand is very important to really make that quite clear, to create trust, and that they really actually want to partner with you instead of only seeing it as a very practical and functional relationship that they actually have with you. Healthcare the same. Is it that I'm just wanting to have a certain procedure, or is it maybe also that yeah, is it a wider experience that actually makes the success of, for instance, my yeah, when I have, for instance, a surgery, maybe the physiotherapy afterwards. It's not only that moment, but maybe it's a wider experience, and maybe we also need to put that more to the front. And also retail. Is it about buying the shoes? Or is it maybe about the whole experience? How will we compete with online retailers? We should be really very specific and clear on what's the added value that we can still provide in the store. So we talked about services. I hope you have a better idea, and maybe yeah, it's also a nice way to reflect on what your perspective was on services, and maybe it has been widened a bit. And let's move now to service design, and as I said, a formal design discipline focused on developing and redeveloping services. So if we look at the global economy, roughly 63% comes from services. So think of retail, tourism, banking, etc. So that's already a large percentage, and it's increasing over time. On the other hand, we also talked about service dominant logic, and that there are a lot of companies out there that are making this transition, becoming more yeah, service orientated. So we're calling this transition servitization. So if you look, for instance, at BMW, they stated that these numbers are quite important to them: 80-20 and 50-50. So they used to have 80% of their designers were focused on product design, car design, those kind of things. And they said they only have 20% of people, designers, that were actually focused on designing systems, services, experiences, etc. And they said, well, that is going to change. 50% is going to be focused on product design, and 50% of our design is going to be focused on system, service, and experience design. So you see that even there, in this kind of manufacturing setting, design and yeah, service design is becoming more and more important. So you could also imagine how much of an influence it also will have for other kind of sectors. Just to give you a practical example, that we need to move from output focus to outcome focus. Not the drill that we're going to sell, but the value that actually, the drill or maybe other things around it can provide. So in this example of Hilti, which their normal statement is more, we want to provide the best equipment in the business. They did some customer research and they found out, well, there are a lot of costs for construction companies that they need to store, transport, maintain the various drills and other kind of construction material, for instance. And also they need to own, for instance, all of that equipment. So what happens if you need to scale up, or what happens when you need to scale down? There's it's not very flexible, and you own it, and that's all an extra cost. Also, when you need to change, for instance, equipment for other projects. So they found out that management was a big hassle. So they said it's not about having the best equipment. Of course, it need to function, etc. I mean, that's like a commodity almost, but it's actually about the right tool at the right time. So that's where also they invented the fleet management service, basically, where it's only they only basically see the products as a part of the service, and the drill in this example is just a vessel for value storage and exchange, but the whole system around it is actually more and more important. So if you just make it more to a consumer point of view, from owning to access, think about your own car. You might have bought your car, you might have leased your car, but you also see that now a lot of people are experimenting with car sharing options. Yeah, they might have a small subscription fee, or maybe they just pay per use. In this example of green wheels here, and if they need to, for instance, move, or if they go on a holiday, they can just take the car that they actually need at that moment. Moving from a product to an actual service. Yeah, I mean, because the Green Wheels actually owns the car, they can also think about, we want to have a sustainable fleet, so they can really work on sustainability because they are actually owning it, for instance. But they also, Green Wheels, they also work together with the National Railroad. They also work together with, for instance, bus transportation, so they can provide a whole experience, a whole service, that the customer also can make more conscious decisions. Am I going to use the car today? Or maybe it's more convenient to take the train together with a bicycle, for instance, and it's all with the same contract, basically. And another nice example is, for instance, mud jeans. So you can lease a jeans there. And what is interesting is that you, after this lease period, you can either buy the jeans, but what is interesting that you can also give it back, and the materials are so made that you can actually reuse the fabric, but you can also reuse some of the metal components, etc. So also this kind of servitization goes back to actually the design of the product itself. It's circular, it's like a sustainable model, and it goes back then also to the packaging, for instance, and the transportation of the actual jeans. So they really try to make you part of the mud jeans community in a sort of way. So there's a lot of added value also for servitizing your business. So with the new focus on services, there was not originally not really a service design discipline. It was really focused on designing things, buildings, fashion, products, graphics, electronics, websites, etc. But we really now need to focus more on designing interactions, systems, that are taking interactions place on systems, services, or maybe also the user experience, so also actually the digital platforms that we work on. And there it's all about value is only created when stakeholders interact. So that can be customers, but as I said before, it can also be different kind of stakeholders. So as you see, you see in development of design, focus more on products to more intangible things, and you also see that coming back in the model of Buchanan, which basically said there are 4 orders of design. The first one is graphics, so think about signs, symbols, and print. And the second one is industrial, it's more tools, products, and buildings. So design, mostly tend to focus on the first 2. But now you really see that design is moving more and more to the right side, and that a lot of companies are actually asking for more third order of design practitioners and fourth order of design practitioners. So the third orders focus on interactions. So think about services, think about experiences, interfaces, and information. And yeah, you really see a change there. So this is also where service design is much more focused on, but also on systems, the fourth order. So then designing organizations, how are people actually working together, government, society, ecosystems. So strategic service design actually focuses on both the third and fourth without forgetting also the first and second, because they are of course all intertwined. So, as I said, strategic service design focus primarily on the third and fourth order of design, interactions, and systems. So, what does a strategic service designer actually do? Well, on a strategic level, they are focusing on the value proposition. So, what value do we actually offer as an organization? What customers do we and don't we want to actually serve? So, that has also to do with positioning your organization, and how do these decisions impact our business model, both short term and long term. So, it's a very important new voice on the boardroom table, together with different kind of important managers or departments within the organization. So that's more on the value proposition level. You also see that strategic service designers are actually then also seeing, well, how does it actually translate to more operational and tactical level? So the customer experience, how should we provide this offering? How does this actually relate to the customer experience? Really have a clear concept also for that. And on the other side, on the blue side, the processes and structure. What do we need to organize within our organization in order to drive the value that we actually envision? So value proposition, customer experience, and processes and structures. And it even goes a little bit beyond that, but this is a nice way to structure it initially. So in order to really make this coherent and unique experience, we need to cross silos. We need to work together with sales, marketing, and the service center, for instance. Also, for instance, product design or R&D, etc. All these things need to work together in order to really think about who's our customer and how can we create this unique and coherent experience, for instance, or this offering that we have in mind. So organizational change plays an important role here. And that means also that we need to take design more serious. We don't need to see it as something separate. So if you think about, for instance, hiring a design firm to design a website, no, we need to see it more as integrated. So often you also see that maybe there is one design department within your organization, so it's more on the peripheral. Think about the desktop publish department that makes some graphic work for your organization, or maybe it's more scattered, but we really need to move more to central and integrated. So think about central, where really product design, for instance, is at the core of the organization, and what has been developed and designed over there is basically what the organization is going to do in a broader sense. But integrated means that it really is a culture which is really spread out through the whole organization, and that can be any kind of sector. You see a lot of organizations like Google, like IBM, and I will give some examples on the next page to really see that all kind of organizations can be a design-driven or led organization. So what's the value actually of that? So I think with the design value index, they really looked at the S&P 500, but also to companies that are actually design centric. Apple, Coca-Cola, Ford, IBM, Nike, SAP, Disney, Black& Decker, etc. Very different kind of organizations, but they all basically apply design as a very important competence within their organization. Not only competence, also an actual mindset. So if you combine the module of Buchanan and Junginger, you see that we need to move higher in the orders of design, but we also need to be more integrated with how we apply design. So that also means that we need leadership to actually make this transition. And that also means that also non-designers need to talk the design language. So with service design thinking, it's on one hand on service orientated, be service orientated as an organization, but also be a design led organization, as I mentioned before. Okay, well, let's move from service design now to design thinking, because design thinking is actually a nice yeah, methodology, philosophy almost, with a mindset, a process, and toolkit where designers but also non-designers can actually solve the complex problems that often are dealt with designing and creating these kind of complex service systems. So it's no longer about business as usual. So that also really goes against something at the perspective that we have of business. And we need to break also with the status quo. And design thinking does that in different ways. And you will also experience that in the other lectures. But what is interesting is, for instance, to already look at the definition of design thinking. So Tim Brown, CEO of IDEO, he basically says, well, an important quote, the definition of design thinking. Design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibility of technology, and the requirements for business success. And what is interesting on the model on the right is that they start from this human desirability perspective, making sure who's our customer, who are we focusing on, and what is actually desired and what kind of value should we actually provide. We don't start from a business point of view, what makes most money, or technology, what kind of technology do we have out there. Start from those needs basically, then see what we can leverage from technology, see what actually makes sense in a sustainable, viable way with regard to our business. So if you look at the principles, there are different kind of principles, but I think human-centeredness is something that always comes back when we look at design thinking. So focus on your main stakeholders and really empathize with them. And empathy is not always that easy, and that is something you also experience later on. A second thing is holistic. So understand the full complexity of the context and then only design. It's not only this relationship that we're looking for, but really what is the surrounding, for instance, of our customers, but also within our organization. We need to look at the bigger pictures, and designers are often able to really make that more comprehensible by, for instance, using overviews, etc. Well, co-creation, which is also very important. We already talked about co-creation with customers, but co-creation can come from all kinds of sources with partners, etc. So it's very important that within design thinking, see how you can actually co-create with various kind of stakeholders. Another aspect is explorative. So we don't believe in one solution. There are often multiple solutions possible, and it's up to you as a design team to actually explore what is possible and then test them and choose, and also one or multiple. And lastly, tangible. We often talk a lot about solutions with maybe an analysis beforehand, but sometimes we only know if something will work if we actually make it more tangible, if we visualize our ideas, if we prototype and test them, etc. So this tangibility is something that is really important for design thinking. Um, so if you think about innovation, if you think about service design, moving to a more ideal situation in the future, we need to be careful that we don't go too quick. And this is often a mistake that is being made. So it's important that we apply a proper process or approach in order to making sure that our final solution has the best impact. So design thinking can help with that, and one of the models that is used often is the double diamond process. It helps just to make sure to ask the question: are we solving the right problem before we are solving the problem right? So you have a business challenge or an ambition. You need to first understand the context, do your research, then define the underlying design challenge. So what is actually driving the issue at hand? What do we actually need to solve in order to come up with ideas and prototype them to come to this final solution? This is not a linear process, and you also experience that later. But this is quite an iterative process. You might go back and forward through this process in order to come to your final solution. So this is also a very interesting comparison, and also with more traditional innovation and project management approaches. And so if you think about the waterfall approach, where we start our project, we have something in mind what we want to create in the end, and we just determine the various steps. in order to put in effort and resources, etc., to come to the final solution in a set amount of time, etc. So with this, if we work more in sprints, and it's not only design thinking that applies that, we can first do research, see where we are, what is the real underlying challenge, come up with ideas, see what works, doesn't work, maybe do additional research. So it might be with a project that you've done earlier than you might expect it later, but throughout the whole process, you reflect on what is actually relevant. Why are we actually investing time in this? And sometimes a project might lead to a dead end, but nevertheless, those insights are quite crucial, because you might always, go a certain way that doesn't yield the results that you hope to achieve. But it all sounds quite structurally, but in reality, often the design thinking process can be a bit of chaos. But when you go through it, at a certain moment you get more and more traction. You are more informed. You see what works and what doesn't work in order to come to the solution that you are trying to aim. So we talked about the mindset. We talked about the process. And there's a toolkit which is immense. On the internet, you can find so many tools. They come from design, from business, from science, from art, from I don't know, from sector-specific origins, for instance. There's so many tools that you can actually use. So it's also very interesting to explore them further on your own during this program. And design thinking is not the holy grail. It's not like design thinking is the only thing. You'll also see other trends when it comes to innovation popping up. So lean is, for instance, here for a long while. Lean startup, Lean Six Sigma, but also agile thinking is really making a disruption with a lot of organizations. And actually, you will see that all these three are quite complementary to each other, but they all serve a different purpose. So it's quite also interesting to see how they actually can work together. And as Tim Cook says, there's no formula. If there was a formula, a lot of companies would have bought the ability to innovate. So there are a lot of methods out there, but often you really need to tailor it to your specific context and the way your organization is already working. You really need to work within the confines that are actually there. Well, I hope I give you a nice overview, also some content to really reflect on. And if you have questions or remarks, or you really want to maybe talk on some aspects more in detail, you're free to give me a call, send me an email, or we could connect on LinkedIn. Thank you for your time.